Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Our first guest when we started this show 4.5 years ago was Mary Beth Carozza. She was just a delegate then. She's the senator now, and we have her back here to talk about everything that happened in Annapolis this year and what's happening next. Welcome, Mary Beth Carozza.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So what's it like being the senator now?
I'll tell you, the way the whole session started will always be memorable. I had Mom and Dad in the Senate chamber when I was sworn in, and that was very, very special day. And President Miller was so welcoming to my parents and to seeing that as I got started, all the support that I received. So that's something where, we'll always remember, will always be a highlight. Very early on, though, I was assigned to a very challenging committee, but one that is very good for the shore, the Senate Education, Health, and Environment Committee. And all the ag and poultry bills come through that committee, the issues affecting the commercial watermen, education comes through there, all the municipalities and their issues, and also veterans issues. We ended up having the most bills in the Senate come through our committee. So it was a lot of heavy lifting, particularly with a new chairman. So that's something that, again, I could not have anticipated where I would have been assigned, but I believe this assignment has been really important for all 3 counties in my district.
What are you seeing happening in terms of legislation? Where are things headed?
I think what we have to recognize that this is a whole new era in Annapolis. So after this election, we lost Republican House seats in the Maryland House of Delegates. We only picked up 1 Republican Senate seat. And the Democrats that were elected have moved further to the left. So what that means, it's put a lot more pressure on the leadership of both the House and the Senate to push a progressive agenda, which means it puts more pressure on the Eastern Shore delegation as a whole to be able to make the case and counter to basically be able to say, when you introduce policies and laws affecting the poultry industry, for example, we need you to understand how this actually impacts real life farm families back here on the shore. A lot more pressure on us to make that case because the makeup of the Maryland General Assembly has moved more to the left. Obviously, that's reflecting a national trend, but it's hit Maryland hard. So I think that we have done a pretty good job as a delegation using our different roles on the various committees to be the strongest advocates we can be with those assignments.
And we've heard, too, that Speaker Bush, the late Speaker Bush, and Senate President Miller have said several times that they kind of rely on the Republicans to keep the General Assembly from going too far to the left.
Very interesting early on conversation that I had with President Mike Miller is he actually said, I love my Republicans, particularly on the committee that I'm serving on, the Senate Education, Health, and Environment. And President Miller made a point to say that he would work with the Eastern Shore delegation, work with me specifically, especially on protecting the poultry industry, knowing that there would be proposals, as there were this last session, that would have very negative impact on the shore poultry and farm community operations here. And he did keep his word. As you look back over the session, there was a nutrient management bill that was originally proposed that would have been really devastating for our farm families as far as the compliance, the fines, and the additional burdensome regulations. With our delegation, with the Maryland Farm Bureau, and through the work on our committee where this bill came through, we were actually we were successful in moving forward with some amendments that reduced those burdens and at least put it more in balance. So that's something where, again, we were able to identify that this would be a red flag issue for the shore, and immediately use our positions on various committees. And obviously that one came through my committee. and to see what we could do to at least bring a little bit of relief on that. The other major initiative that was introduced again this year was the Poultry Air Emissions Bill, and this is the second year in a row. And again, that was a bill where there would be a mandate, a very expensive mandate, to put these air monitors on the shore in place. And what we countered with is say, wait a minute, why don't you let this partnership between the Delmarva poultry industry, the Keith Campbell Environmental Foundation, and the Maryland Department of Environment work out this partnership where they're going to put monitors in place and start to collect information and make this science-based, as opposed to going forward with a proposal that could cost anywhere in the $10 to $50 million range and not even have it scientifically based. So we were successful in holding that legislation off this year. Now what we're trying to do during the interim is I've invited some of my colleagues down on my committee to visit at Purdue, to go and see a poultry farm, to possibly look at where these monitors may be set up, again, so they can see that we can make progress on these issues without moving forward with a piece of legislation that would be so expensive and not even accomplish the goals that the shared goals that we have.
Giving it a try, the partnership thing is a good idea, just to try it.
Just to clarify, DPA would not be regulating at all.
Right.
They've contributed to the initiative, but it would be MDE,
right.
And we want to hold MDE accountable, because that is their job. But again, the fact that the industry is willing to recognize that there are these concerns, make a financial investment and commitment.
I think they wanted to go
this.
away too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at least, so our point, the argument that we made in committee is, let's allow the partnership to work. Let's give this a try. It
Right.
may only be a first step that may lead to more monitoring, but we don't know. As opposed to going full steam ahead with a very expensive proposal that we may not even need.
Right. Right. You talk about the Annapolis playground left and right. My daughter said something fascinating the other day. She said, Dad, I never realized I lived in a blue state till I went to college. She goes to school in Baltimore. So very blue, the students that are around her and the urban area, Western Maryland being conservative, Eastern Shore being conservative. She didn't know she lived in a blue state.
And it's gone even more blue after this election, particularly in the House of Delegates, the Maryland House of Delegates. I think that then the challenge becomes how you build your coalitions, and I can effectively do that on the Senate side. So, for example, on the committee that I'm on, the Senate Education, Health, and Environment, there are 4 Republicans on there. You need 6 votes on this committee to either pass something or to stop something. So that means you need to build a coalition with at least 2 other Democrats. The good news is on the Senate you have more independents. President Miller has been very clear to say that you're not just a senator for your district, you're a senator for the state of Maryland. And he really encourages other senators to become involved in issues outside of their own district to make the case. Because we're looking for the best policies that will impact all of Maryland. So, for example, on my committee, you have Senator Obie Patterson, who represents the southern part of Prince George's County, and there are some common issues on rural issues that we can work together with him on some of those ag issues.
Much.
There's Senator Arthur Ellis from Southern Maryland. He represents a very rural district as well, down with President Miller's district. And we've been able to find some issues and some common goals and to work on those issues through the committee.
One of the things that they teach in business school is that when you're part of a big herd, you do something early on to distinguish yourself, to make a mark. And you had that happen. You gave the big Lincoln Day address up at the General Assembly, which is a big deal.
I was voluntold, and it was one of those situations where I received a call from the Republican Senate GOP Chief of Staff, and she said, I'd like to come down to your office and talk to you. And I'm saying, okay, something must be up. And she came down and she said, you will be giving the Lincoln Day address. And I was thinking, okay, probably in 2020 or 2021. She goes, and I said, okay, well, what year would I be doing that? And she said, oh, you're giving it for 2019. I said, okay, that's less than 3 weeks away. And at that point, she smiled. She said, that's right. So I realized that, number one, it really is very humbling and an honor to be asked to give the Lincoln Day address.
Big deal.
And he happens to be my two favorite presidents are President Lincoln and President Reagan. So to be asked to do that as my first session as a senator, really was a highlight. And I took a lot of time with that address, and I found a story that President Lincoln, during the Civil War, had the opportunity to really, as I like to say, plow over Baltimore with one of the battles, but also realized that there would be very devastating consequences to the community itself. And he figured out another way to achieve his goal of basically overcoming, but not plowing through Baltimore, but going around. And the point that he was making is that you can sometimes achieve your goals and leave something on the table for the other side, to leave some dignity for the other side. And I used that example in my Lincoln Day address, and then later used it on a speech on the Senate floor when we were talking about issues affecting the commercial watermen or our shore farmers, to say, you have the majority here in the Senate. You have the supermajority in the Maryland General Assembly. However, there are ways that you can achieve your goals without having to take it all from these other constituencies, to leave something on the table. And that's something where I believe that by giving that example in the Lincoln Day address and then coming back to it on some issues that affected the shore community, really made a mark. And it was one of those unanticipated surprises. I had Democrats in leadership positions, chairs of committees, that went out of their way to compliment me on the speech, to say, we listened to your message.
It's one of those rare events where everyone actually sits there and pays attention.
It's very humbling because you are in front of all of your colleagues and you're the new senator, and you're trying to send a message that, first of all, would honor President Lincoln and the importance of the event, but also to tie it to your work together. And that's why I did pick out that one story about, the ability to leave something on the table for the other side while you can still reach your goals. And what was unexpected, could not have anticipated, I received a standing ovation from my colleagues, and two of the chairs of very powerful committees on the Senate side went out of their way, not only as I was walking back to my seat all the way in the back of the chamber, but
you're back there in that corner.
That's right. But not only stopped me on the way back, but later, a day or two later, a couple of my Senate colleagues went out of their way to compliment me on the speech and said, we listened to your message, and we are able to work together on the Senate side. And that's what I have found very refreshing, that when you are one of 47, as President Miller said, you're not only a senator for your district, but for the state, that you're expected to do your homework on other issues and to engage on those issues. And as long as you do your homework, which I do, and come prepared, your views will at least be heard. Not saying we're going to win everything on the shore. Again, we have to work harder in our delegation because we are so outnumbered. But the fact that you will be listened to, and if you have your facts and figures, you can also, you can be effective in making the case for the shore.
See, now I didn't know how I was going to ask my next question, but you set that up perfectly. And I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but it was that preparation and that persuasion that you have that was able to get the expansion at the Ocean City Convention Center, something done not with your fellow legislators so much, but in terms of impressing the leadership and working with them. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. First of all, I want to say that was a total team effort. The Ocean City Convention Center expansion is not only good for Ocean City and the shore, it's a revenue generator for the state. So in 2018, we were able to pass that bill out of the House, but it did not pass out of the Senate. President Miller did not let it go.
Yeah, he didn't want it.
He did not let it go.
Yeah.
So in the interim, Governor Hogan came down to the Ocean City Convention Center, said, he vowed to move forward with that, and we, as members of the delegation, particularly District 38, that would be a top priority from the get-go. So when the mayor of Ocean City, Rick Mann, and his team came up, they did an excellent presentation with the Maryland Stadium Authority in front of both the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee, which Senator Eckert serves on that committee, and the House Appropriations Committee with Delegate Carl Anderton. They made the factual case of why we need to go forward now with the expansion and not delay. The delay would actually end up costing the state additional millions of dollars.
Right.
And they did a great job with that. The bill was presented in both committees and nothing moved. The House made very clear that they were not going to move it unless the Senate did, because the House said, we passed it in 2018, we don't have a problem with it, but we're not going to go through the hoops unless the Senate passes it. So we were up to, and so I would occasionally check in, as well as Mayor Meehan and the team. Even former Senator Jim Mathias checked in just to see what was going on with it, and it was not moving. And finally, about, I would say about 10 days out, a week out, Mayor Meehan wrote a very factual letter, again, making the case for why this is good for the whole state of Maryland. Sent that letter to President Miller. Mayor Meehan and I were working very closely together.
From what I heard, it was like a handwritten letter that you
So that one was not.
Okay.
I did a handwritten letter. So I ended up asking for a meeting with President Miller, which is a big deal for a new senator. You're not going to run to the Senate president for every issue
Right.
that comes up. You have to pick and choose your priorities. And this was a top priority for our whole area. And so I asked to see the president. And it was one of the days where I had my appointment, but he had gone through his treatment, his cancer treatments, and I received a call and said, the president will meet with you, but he's really not up to it today. Will you meet with him tomorrow? I said, of course. What that one day reprieve allowed me to do is I wrote a handwritten note, and I wrote it based on not just the factual case of why it makes sense to go forward now, but I also let the president know I had listened to his message, particularly to the new senators, and I said, Mr. President, you said that we were senators for all the state, and this is why this is good for all the state. I said, and Mr. President, you have been good for the Eastern Shore. You have been good to us as a region, and right now we need you now. And just making the case of why his help was needed at this point during this session. And my meeting went very well. We had a very candid conversation. He had warned me as a new member that I would have a rough patch as a new senator, mainly because I think I was not expected to be there.
Right.
And now that I am a senator and I've worked through that first session, very glad to report that President Miller gave the go-ahead. And that bill, though, we had to work really hard because it was the Friday before sine die. So it finally moved out of the Senate on that Friday. That Saturday before sine die, the House was in, but the Senate was not. But I decided to stay up an extra day. I went over and I personally met with my former chair, Maggie McIntosh, and asked her if she would expedite this to get this through. And Delegate Wayne Hartman and Delegate Anderton, they were very helpful in this as well. And we just had to make sure we just didn't run out of time, because good bills have stopped right on the finish line because we simply ran out of time.
They die in the hallway in between the chambers.
And we stopped earlier this session because of Speaker Bush's death and the tribute that we were going to give him at 11:10 the night of sine die.
Right.
So basically now you're taking away a whole hour where you're trying to push these last minute bills through. So I can happily report within a couple hours before sine die, we were able to see both of the bills, the House and the Senate bills, pass with the Ocean City expansion being approved by the full Maryland General Assembly.
So what do you take away from that next? Is like, oh, I got lucky on that one, or wait, I know how I can exercise some power.
That first of all, I take away that it took a total team effort, and it really was. We had a team that came up from Ocean City that could make the case. I appreciate the fact that former Senator Jim Mathias was able to weigh in with President Miller. I also think it took being able to go and personally ask for that meeting. I had to ask for that meeting with President Miller. I knew that it would be a highlight as far as being able to help make the case, and that the combination of all of that, being able to go to the chair of Senate Budget and Taxation, Nancy King, and her advice to say, she told me, she basically said, Senator Carozza, you have to go and see the president personally on this. Having served 4 years on House Appropriations Committee, to be able to go that Saturday before sine die and be able to walk into and see the chair of Appropriations, Maggie McIntosh, and to make that case. So it was almost like I was using everything in my toolkit, from past experiences, past public service, past working relationships, to make the best case for the team that I could at that point. And I also found that, being a senator, it put me in a stronger position to make the case.
One thing, the elected leaders I'm around, the words Kerwin Commission come up, and they react with dread because they're fearful of what the expense is going to be with this. When I hear Kerwin Commission, I'm sorry, but I get excited that it's going to do things to improve public education in Maryland, so I get enthusiastic about it. I understand you've just been named to the Kerwin Commission.
That's right. And a little bit of background on Kerwin. This last session, we passed what I call the Kerwin Blueprint Light. And it was a bill that focused, as you mentioned, the education policies. And this bill took us up through, basically took us through a couple of years that we were agreeing on the policies, and also Kerwin Blueprint Light was paid for. I was willing to vote for that mainly because of the direction of Kerwin, being able to elevate teaching as a profession, so that our best teachers, when they want to be promoted, don't have to go out of the classroom and into administration, that we have incentives to keep them in the classroom.
That's a great idea.
Not only with salary increases, but other incentives, that their leadership track, promotional track, can be within teaching and not administration. So that is a key feature of Kerwin. As you well know, I've been passionate about career trade technology education, and Kerwin has made that a priority. And I want to continue to use my new role on Kerwin to promote career trade technology. But my biggest role on Kerwin will be to fight for fair funding formulas for the shore. Right now, they're out of whack as far as when you look at, for instance, a Worcester County that contributes the most as a county but receives the least from the state of Maryland, because the formula right now is based on a wealth formula as opposed to free and reduced meals, and looking at the poverty in all of the counties, and not just the wealth formula of Ocean City. So I want to use my role on Kerwin to, number one, promote and fight for these fair funding formulas for the shore. What everyone needs to understand about Kerwin is that we move forward on the policies, but we have not done the heavy lifting of working through these funding formulas. And so this is where we will be using the interim right up until we go back in January to work through these funding formulas. I also made very clear when I talked to President Miller's chief of staff that you cannot put me on this commission and assume that I am an automatic yes vote. Because number one, I have serious concerns about the accountability piece. I will continue to support Governor Hogan's proposals on the Inspector General and the accountability piece, because we're already spending all of this money on education. So that's really a priority. And then again, making sure that as we work through the funding formulas, that they really are taking into account our rural shore areas.
You mentioned Hogan, and I know it's a personal thing for you. You guys are good friends. What's next for the governor? I know he was just reelected, but what is next on his list of career accomplishments, do you think?
Well, I really, first of all, think he is totally focused on being the best governor he can be for the state of Maryland, particularly with the new challenges in the Maryland General Assembly. So it was really good to see that he just spent his Memorial Day weekend right
He was
here
at the
in
beach.
Ocean City,
Yeah.
celebrating his birthday down here. I think what that should tell, especially our constituents on the shore, that not only does he support the shore initiatives, but he is so invested. I mean, he has a place down here. He's been coming here every summer since he's been a kid. So we want to basically take advantage of the fact that Governor Hogan was reelected as a Republican, focused on shore issues, and maximize that, for the next 3 sessions. And so that is where I am trying to keep my focus. And I really want to compliment Governor Hogan's with the new district that I have. I have picked up all of Somerset County, and I am very focused on helping and supporting Chrisfield's priority revitalization and economic development priorities. And among those are really some basic infrastructure with Chrisfield, their sewage and flooding issues. So we now have a commitment from Governor Hogan's administration when Secretary Holt, who's the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development, came down to Chrisfield in person and made a commitment on the spot after hearing the infrastructure needs of Chrisfield to commit to supporting that all the way through this administration. So that's huge. That's an example I want to show. Also, right here in Salisbury, last night, knowing that the Governor Hogan and Yumi Hogan, the First Lady, are the chairs of the National Folk Festival with the Purdue's, and that he's putting basically the power of his office to promote the National Folk Festival, which is huge not only for the shore but for the whole state of Maryland. So I guess in answer to your question, I really want to make sure that we're leveraging his commitment and his support for the shore throughout his whole governorship.
How different is it for you being a senator compared to a delegate? Is it more fun?
I'll tell you what it is. Number one, it is very humbling because it's a big district and there are a lot of challenges in this district. But what I'm finding that in the Senate, it's as if I'm able to use everything in my past public service as a former chief of staff in President Bush's administration, as a delegate for the past 4 years, and now as a senator, my close connections back home with every constituency, that all of it now is coming together. And I really want to thank my constituents because they have made an extra effort to come up to Annapolis, to invite me to events, whether it's the commercial watermen, our farmers, our small business operators, our seasonal employers, our healthcare providers. They are giving me the opportunity to be very hands-on. So during this interim, I'll continue to be all over the district in an official capacity, hearing how these issues are impacting. We haven't talked about minimum wage, but with my appointment to the Senate bipartisan small business task force, we might be able to provide some targeted relief, whether it's on paid sick leave or minimum wage, to our small business operators.
And that's important because our local chamber feels like they're not heard, at the General Assembly. But go ahead, yeah.
But you're right. But, Bill Chambers and the Salisbury Chamber of Commerce, Mike Dunn, the Greater Salisbury Committee, they know that they have had always throughout my tenure an open door. They give me the examples I need to be a more effective advocate.
She's Mary Beth Carozza. She's just off her first session in the Maryland State Senate, and we're thrilled to have her here today. Thanks for being here, Mary Beth.
Thank you very much.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.